The Dancing with Wisdom podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Dancing with Wisdom podcast with me, Sunil Raheja. And it's great to have our guest, Mark Greene, with us. Mark, so good to have you again.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me back. Doesn't happen often.
That's right, we've got you back. Well, if you missed the last episode with Mark, we basically delved into Mark's history as growing up Jewish and joyous, becoming an advertising executive, and then his metamorphosis into the world of whole life integration. Because wisdom is about bringing all of life under the authority of God, but doing that in a way that brings meaning, purpose, and fun to you. And we talked about, those four aspects of wisdom: being, relating, doing, and leaving. And in this podcast and the one after this as well, we're going to just integrate what does it mean to bring work into our lives in a way that really, as it were, brings out all that who God is and what he has for our lives. Now, Mark is very passionate about that, and he's written a book called Thank God It's Monday, Flourishing in Your Workplace. Now, notice it's not Thank God It's Friday. Most people, I think, you hear that on Fridays is, oh, good, thank God it's Friday, and then I've got the weekend and I can put my feet up. Work is something that I have to endure from Monday to Friday so that I can actually then start the real living. But Mark, I think one of the key concepts you want to really get across to us is that God is interested in every area of our lives, and that what we do Monday to Friday in our work lives really matters. Tell us more about that.
Well, I mean, when you think about all the time that we do spend doing work, if it's not significant, in a sense, other than, if you like, making money, what's going on there?
Yeah.
And so what you begin to look at is, what's the purpose of work? Why have we been given this gift in the first place? What's its intention? And you begin to think, well, work is serving other people. It's creating services, products, cleaning things up, ordering things, bringing joy, bringing beauty to others. So at its element, work is the way that we create a society. Without work, we don't have walls, we don't have roofs, we don't have roads, we don't have cars, we don't necessarily have kiwi yogurt. I mean, there's all kinds of things we don't get without other people serving us in that way, using their gifts and their skills to create a society. So work actually, at one level, just at its most basic level, is the way that we serve one another to create a good world. Now, whether the world turns out to be good or not is a different question, and whether all the ways that some of us are required to work is healthy for us is also a question. But at its root, if you like, the energy that we give, the opportunity that we have to use our skills or develop our skills and use them for others, that for many people is a joy. Whether it's a physical strength or a physical skill, or it's a mental ability, whatever it might be, actually we're built to use those gifts, and some of them just, the joy flows from us when we do. Now, clearly not everybody is in a job where their joy flows all the time because they're doing something they really love. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the work isn't significant in itself, or doesn't have tremendously positive impacts on other people.
Yeah, I'm reminded of that verse in Ephesians, which is, we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works that he's prepared in advance for us to do. And as you say, it'd be great if we can find that in our work. Not necessarily so, but we can, as it were, have that at the back of our minds, that there is good work that he's called me to do. I mean, work is, I suppose, if I think of this sort of post-COVID time as well, we've seen massive changes in the way that we work. We're in front of computer screens a lot more. We're working from home. Many people are questioning, is the work that I'm doing really what I'm called to do? Should I be doing something else? What would you say to those people?
Well, it's a really important question, isn't it? Because sometimes we fall into things along the way. We're just doing them because we're doing them. And also we work the way we do because we didn't think we had an option. Or we do the work we do because we didn't think we could find anything else to do. So I think it's a good questioning. And as we question, I think one of the things to be thinking about is not only how does work fit into my wider life, which for many women has been more of a question, if you like, for longer. how do I integrate, for whatever reasons to
Yes.
do with the way that Western society has been constructed
Yes.
for women, if you like. How do I integrate a desire, for example, to lead a company or build a company
Yes.
with another desire, which to bring up a family in particular kind of ways. So how do I integrate
Yes.
those with whatever my husband or partner
Yes.
might also be wanting to do? So we understand the notion of how does work fit in with our wider lives.
Yes.
Does it bring us flourishing overall?
Yes.
So some people, because again of the way the economy works, are commuting 3-4 hours a day so that they can afford for they and their families to live in a reasonable house with a garden, but it's 2 hours away as a commute.
Yes.
So they're making these trade-offs.
Yes, exactly.
Round work.
And I'm just thinking, you talked earlier on in the book, you talk about work being a 7-letter word and the idea around service and service to others and service to God. And what's fascinating, I think, in the book as well, you've got lots of stories of ways that people have, as it were, integrated that. Because I think traditionally there's been that separation, my work life and my home life, my work life and my church or religious life. But I think if I can see how to integrate that together, I'm thinking of that quote from, I think, Ray Kroc, who was founder of McDonald's. He said, I believe in God, family, and business. And when I'm at work, I reverse the order. But that's quite a cynical way to live, I think, really. And yet I think what, thank God it's Monday, shows us is that God actually wants you to enjoy your work, to flourish in your work, so that you can be of service to others and so that you can grow. And I think, are there some stories or illustrations you can give us that really bring that to life? There are lots there. Yeah.
There are. Well, let's take a job like a plumber. This isn't in the book. This is a free one, but because
Right.
I've just happened to have been talking to plumbers recently and
Okay, yeah.
got lots of plumber stories as it happens.
Yes.
So what does a plumber do? Well, a plumber, at bad moments, the plumber rescues you. And so this guy Valerie, he's this big man,
Yes.
about 6'4". He's got broad shoulders and he's got this huge smile on his face.
Yeah.
And he comes in and he's always smiling.
Yeah.
And he turns up and there's water running down the walls or water coming down the ceiling
Yeah.
or whatever it might be. And people say, why are you smiling? He said, I'm smiling because now I'm here. It's going to be okay. So what does a plumber do?
Wow. Yes.
They don't just ensure a really good thing, which is that clean water comes in and dirty water goes out.
He
Or if
relieves
you
your
like,
stress. He
he relieves stress. He is a bringer of peace. He's a bringer of security. Because a good
Yes.
plumber, which is something that Valerie does and also my friend Robert does, when they come in to do one job, they just have a quick look around. Not necessarily because they're looking for more work, but because actually, well, I might as well just check that that's okay.
Yes.
And that brings more peace, more security
Yes.
to people who might well worry, oh, my pipe's going to burst. Why is that tap squeaking? Or,
Yes.
I haven't had my boiler service for 300 years. Is it going to blow up? And
Yes.
so on and so forth. So they bring peace.
Yes.
And a plumber comes in and,
Yes.
they develop a relationship of trust over time with a
Yes.
family. And so they bring a certain persona in.
Yes.
And even the emergency plumber goes into a place, or
Yeah.
the one-off guy. I mean,
Yes.
Valerie went into one guy's house to install something,
Yes.
and he was looking around the room, and he noticed all this Star Wars paraphernalia.
Right.
So he says to this guy who was in his 70s, I think, he says, wow, what's all this Star Wars stuff? What's the story? He
Yes.
said, well, I designed the Stormtrooper.
Oh, wow.
The design for the Stormtrooper,
Actually
the white
designed it.
Stormtrooper,
Yeah.
and there was a big one there. There it was.
Wow.
And then they're having this conversation, and then Valerie notices that a sort of shadow passes over this man's face.
Yes.
And he says, what's wrong?
Yeah.
And they develop this kind of relationship of trust very quickly, because that's the way it is with some people. You trust
Yeah.
them.
Very quickly. Yeah. You can do that. Yeah. There's
And
a
he said, well,
rapport.
actually, I've been diagnosed with lung cancer. So Valerie says, could I pray for you? Because
Yeah.
God loves you.
Yes.
So he prays for him. So it's every work, well, not every workplace, but
Yeah.
many workplaces give you opportunities to do work that
Yes.
brings a good, which is peace, security, health,
Yes.
but also is an opportunity to bless somebody, to pray for somebody, to
Yes.
treat them as a whole person.
Yes.
I remember one young woman saying to me that they had a decorator in once
Yes.
in their home. She was about 19 at the time, and her parents were going through a really, really rough patch. She was 19 when I talked to her. This was
Yeah.
when she was about 15. And she said the decorator, when he came in to do the decorating in the house,
Yes.
was like a lifeline,
Right.
because, they would chat and he would, be warm and encouraging and all that kind of stuff. Not that he necessarily knew, but she knew.
Yes.
And so you're a presence in a place only for a moment. Well,
Can
if
make a
that's the
big
case for a
difference. Yeah.
plumber or a decorator or a tradesperson or a
Mm.
post person who you don't see very often, how much more so can somebody say in an office where you develop a relationship with somebody over time,
Yes.
not only do work that serves the community,
Yes.
but actually minister, love the people.
Yes. So what I'm hearing you saying, I think, is that there is the service that we do, that actually like the plumbing or the, as it were, the wallpapering or whatever the DIY work that's done, and then there's coming as a whole person
Yeah.
and bringing the whole person to your work, not just the job. Actually, I'm reminded actually of in the book Dancing with Wisdom. It's dedicated to a friend of mine, Bunty Abhishek Banerjee, who died suddenly. And he was my tech guy when I was sort of in church leadership as well. And it always used to amaze me, because whenever something would go wrong with the technology of the computer, he introduced me to what were in those days iPods and MP3 players. They were all new things at that time. If that technology wasn't working, I would put my head in my hands and I think, oh no, this is not doing what I want it to do. And I always remember he would look at this and it wasn't doing what it's supposed to, and he'd say, "That's really amazing. That's wonderful." And it was as if his eyes lit up, because it wasn't doing what it's supposed to doing. And there was something within him that was galvanized that says, I want to find out why it's not doing that. And that's going to be great, because then I can serve and I can solve that problem. And it was just wonderful to see. And he was a huge blessing to us within our church community in terms of solving technical problems, because it gave him life and joy and meaning. And it was just wonderful to see. I mean, this is thinking back in hindsight, looking at that was how God was using him at that time.
Well, I think that's right. And I think even if you take something like housework,
Yes.
okay, so housework is demeaned.
Yes, by society. Yes.
By society in general, it's
Yes.
just that stuff that somebody does. Well, when you look at the way that God works, say, the way that we see him working at the beginning in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible.
Yes.
We're told he creates, and then what does he do? He brings order out of chaos.
Chaos.
Well, what does housework do? Well, sometimes it brings order out of chaos.
Absolutely.
It says, he provides. It creates a context in which provision is made for people's needs. Well, what does housework do? It either does that, in terms of here's a bed you can sleep in.
Yes.
Here's a clean basin that you can wash your hands in. Here's food that you can eat, and so on. You provide.
Yeah.
God's work brings joy. Apparently,
Yes.
Eden was beautiful and it was lovely to look at, and housework brings joy, because actually a tidy room, I hear, is a more joyous thing to work in than an untidy room.
Yes.
God's work brings beauty, and again, housework, does that, doesn't it?
And so it is the mindset that you've got within it. It's the way that you look at your work. I think is it Mother Teresa or somebody who says is that we can't do great things, but we can do small things with great love.
Yes,
it's that. Yeah.
Well, I think that's also an aspect of it, isn't it? Which is what you see. When God creates Eden, which means in the original language Hebrew means delight. So it's a garden of delight.
Delight. Yes.
So he's love. So what's he trying to do? He's creating a place of delight, of flourishing, of joy.
Joy.
And there are workplaces, and for many seasons of my life, I've been in workplaces which I'm not saying they're perfect, but essentially they're a delight. Now I know that's a privilege, but I think it's not that uncommon. A workplace is meant to be a place where you know delight, where you engage with people, where you get to serve, and so on and so forth.
And so as disciples of Christ, that should be what we're aiming to bring. We're aiming to bring that light and joy and love into the workplace, which so often can be a place of negativity, cynicism, backbiting, backstabbing, all that kind of stuff. And to stand out and be different, and to realize that actually I'm an ambassador called into this context, into this workplace, among many people who have no idea of God, no understanding of God, who have a very cynical and negative view of the world. I can actually bring some wholeness and goodness. I mean, that could be transformational.
It can be. I mean, I would say though that there are there are some people who create fantastic workplaces who are good people who are not necessarily of faith.
Yes. Oh,
I
yes,
think,
absolutely. No, no, absolutely.
I mean, I
Absolutely, yeah.
think, John Lewis did fantastic work with his
Yes.
staff. Although you can see the Christian principles on which he was based, but he wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily a person of faith. But I do think part of it is getting that vision. And I
Yes.
think one of the interesting things today is how many of the kind of on-trend ideas can be traced back to the Bible. So, for example,
Yeah.
the wisdom of servant leadership. For example, servant leadership is all over, if you like, the mainstream leadership material.
Mm.
How do I, as the leader, serve my people so they can give their best?
Yes.
Well, where does that come from? I mean, just the very phrase is,
Yes.
it comes out of comes from Christ.
Of the true
It
servant
comes
leader. The true
it comes
servant
out of
leader.
Jesus, who came to
Yes.
serve and not to be served.
Yes.
So I think
Yeah, and so I see my work
not
not just a way to make money, but I see my work as a way to serve others and to bring good into the world. And money is, as it were, a byproduct because it then enables me to do more good, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it also enables you to provide for the people
And
that you're concerned with, and also, I mean,
which is part of doing good. Yeah.
it is part of it, but it also, I think, it also enables you to play badminton, for example,
Yes.
if that happens to be your sport,
Oh, yeah,
which
well,
apparently it is,
That's
or
right.
whatever it is that you like to do. In
Yeah.
other words, it's an enabler, a surplus.
Yes.
We need a surplus in order to be able to do those things which express other aspects of us. It's tough to learn to play the violin or the piano or the electric guitar without any resources.
It does, yeah. And I suppose the other thing that work does as well is it matures and develops our character. It develops who we are. Because as we take that seriously, I think you talk about that in the book about the importance of excellence. And I tell you what, the chapter that really challenged me in there was the issue around integrity. And there's this lovely quote. I think at the beginning of the book, someone quotes Spurgeon asking a cleaning lady, this is in the 19th century, about whether she'd truly come to a true faith. And he asked her, what's changed? And she said, well, now I sweep under the mats.
Yeah.
So this idea that actually God is interested in everything I'm doing and I can't pull the wool over his eyes.
Yes, there is. Yeah, I mean, it's that commitment to doing it well,
Yes.
not just for the, if you like, for the human master, in a
Mm.
sense, for two reasons. One is because the work is worth doing well, and two, because she sees it as a service to God, something that would please him, that it's done well, because
Yes.
it's worth it. It's worth
Yes.
doing it well.
Yes, and I just the other quote is I think it's that Martin Luther King quote, which is if you're called to be a road sweeper, then sweep the roads as Michelangelo painted paintings and Beethoven composed music, so the angels of heaven may say, "Here was a great road sweeper who worked as well as." It's that, as it were, paradigm shift, to use a big word, in a sense that shift of understanding of my calling, because I think that's part of actually where living in wisdom is that realization that my life and my work is much, much more than just what I see I'm doing in front of me. And you gave the example
Yeah.
of the housewife, but it's
It was a lovely story.
yeah.
If you like, of just one action by somebody that I've
Yeah.
always remembered.
Mm.
There was a man called Michael Greene who died not so long ago,
Yeah.
and he was actually a bishop, and he went around the world. He wrote many books, and he lived in the same town as my parents. My father was a dentist,
Right. Yeah.
and he was his dentist.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yes. Yeah.
he and his wife invited my mother over for dinner one evening. And I discovered this about 10 years later. And I was obviously interested because
Yes.
since then I'd become a Christian, and my parents had invited one of the most famous,
Yes.
sort of Christians, bishops in
Yeah.
Britain for dinner.
And who's famous for, as it were, really articulating the Christian message
Yeah.
very clearly, very lucidly, very
Really-
very winsomely. Yeah.
And so I asked them, so what do you remember from your dinner with this, brilliant communicator about the gospel? And I'm thinking some fantastic phrase. And this, did he bring up the subject of Jesus over the preprandial sherry, or did he wait till you were sozzled, or what?
Yeah.
What was going on? And my mother, it was a few years later, she said, "Well, I remember how he carved the meat. He did it with such dignity."
Oh,
And I
right.
thought, blimey, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So anyway, a few years later, I happened to go to a lecture by him, and I waited in line and, to say hello. And I'd met him before, and I said, "Hello, Michael. My name's Mark Greene. You may know my pet." And he did remember, and said, many years ago, "How are they?" And he asked all the questions, and I said, many years ago, you had my parents over for dinner.
Yes.
And my mother remembers one thing. Oh, yes, what was that? And I wonder what he was thinking. What did he think that she remembered? And I said, well, she remembered how you carved the meat with such dignity. And he said, well, I suppose I would have done, wouldn't I? After all, the animal gave its life for me.
Oh, great insight.
So, but it was how fast. In other words,
it just
so deep was his respect for this animal that God had created, and that had, in a sense, given its life that we might eat or they might eat it, that he carved the flesh in a particular way. So any action, in a sense, can be done in a way that speaks.
Yes, and what I think you're talking about there, Mark.
Thank you. I love being confused with Michael Greene. He sold more books than me.
What is this sacred secular divide? And there are sort of religious duties, and there are non-religious duties, and the religious ones are more holy and better than the non-religious ones.
Yeah, and I suppose why I'm so excited about it is not only because when you realize you can do everything with God, then actually you're more conscious to invite God into everything because he wants to be part of it.
Yes.
But it also says to people, I think many people today are actually wanting to live a life of wisdom and purpose. They want all of it to hang together. And I think that's particularly the case, for late teens and early 20s these days, that they're not content to go, I'm going to live for the weekend.
Yes.
I mean, whether they are people of faith or not, they're going, I want to live a life of purpose.
Yes.
I want it all to hang together.
Yes.
And
we've lost that in our culture. We seem to have really lost that, I think, within the culture. Yeah.
And what I would say is, what if you like, Jesus is saying is, it does count.
Yes.
It all can count because you're working with me to create a better world, whatever you're doing.
Yes.
And that, I think, is something that people need to hear.
Yes, and I think that's we've really resonated with. Thank God, it's Monday with the book. It's in its 5th edition. I think you said it's about 40,000 copies sold. What else, in a sense, would you hope that people would get from the book or take away from it? I mean, you talked about this lack of this sacred secular divide, this fact that God is intimately interested in everything you're doing. He's got a purpose for you. Anything else?
Well, I think the thing that's come to me recently is that when you're working with God, you're not working for a boss with a set of performance targets.
Yes.
You're working in grace. This God is with you. This God is kind. This God wants the best for you. You're not wandering around thinking, oh my goodness, I made a mistake. Wasn't that terrible?
Yes.
Or yes, he has a desire for excellence, but only he really gets to do perfection.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So we're not, it's not another burden.
That's right, yeah.
It's not
I'm not
another
pruning
burden.
myself. I don't,
And so we don't, often I think in the world, honestly, and because of the way partly we're educated to, in a sense, we are evaluated by our results. And at one level that's appropriate. You either got the equation right or you got it wrong. And yes, no, you either kicked the ball in the goal or you kicked it over the bar. It's either good or, and in a sense also with work. So it becomes very easy to evaluate ourselves constantly by our performance.
Yes.
And therefore think that our identity, who we are, is actually bound up with how good we might be at something.
Yes.
And so I think that whilst, Jesus says work is really important.
Don't make your identity based on that.
It's not your identity. It's not how you get right with God. God wants to be in it. It's important. It's valuable. But don't think, well, not only do I have to do this well to please my boss. Now I have to get it right because I'm doing it for God. I have to get even righter. I have to be, in a sense, more excellent than I am.
That's right. And which becomes, as it were, a stick to beat yourself with, really, because
we're not, because you're a person of faith doesn't necessarily make you a better footballer.
No.
Your
that's
character might be stronger, or it might not be, but it doesn't make you a better
Yes.
footballer. It doesn't make you a better coder. It
Yeah.
doesn't make you, per
No.
se, a more talented fine artist,
Yes.
or in itself a better plumber.
And I think that's the liberating truth, isn't it? Is that be who God intended you to be. Don't try and be somebody else, because everybody else is taken. In a sense, that's the truth
Yeah.
there. And I think the other thing that comes with is that wisdom. In a sense, you have to get the order right. It's being, relating, then doing, and then ultimately one day leaving.
Yeah.
And if you can get that order right, in understanding who you are in your identity, then in your relationships, and then do the good works that He's called you to do, then I think it makes sense. Mark, thank you so much for writing this book. And I do praise it's called, thank God it's Monday, Flourishing in Your Workplace. If you haven't got it, I'd really encourage you to go out and get it. And the stories and your humour is amazing. I did enjoy your humour, some good jokes, but some deep, profound truths as well. And thank you for blessing and encouraging us with that.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Dancing with Wisdom podcast, presented by Sunil Raheja. For details on the Dancing with Wisdom book and its accompanying workbook, please visit drsunil.com. If you know someone who would enjoy this podcast, then please share it, give it a thumbs up on YouTube, and help it grow by leaving a nice review. Life's challenges can diminish, define, or develop you. Which will it be? Make sure you hunger for the wise one. The choice is yours.